Today's story is a killer clown that was seemingly a random murderer that left the town of Palm Beach, Florida shaken. But as the truth came out, they were even more shocked. You gotta hear this. Hey makers, welcome back to season 2 of Stab and Stitch. I can't believe it either, but y'all, I am so excited for what I've got on deck for you this season. We are doing 10 episodes, 10 weeks in a row, all the way from now until the new year. So buckle up, this is gonna be great. Now, before you pick up your project, make sure that you've hit that subscribe button and that you go ahead and hit the like and comment and tell me what you're working on during this episode. I'm super pumped. Now, before we get into this week's story, and I know you're all super anxious to hear about it because I've been teasing it, I wanted to show you what I'm working on this week. So I've got 2 whips to show, one that I'm actually going to be working on while we talk. So this is soon to be my no crying in baseball tee. It's a test for Isabel from Isn't. If you don't follow her, hit her up. And the yarn was gifted to me actually by Samantha from Winnie Jo Fiber Company. So it is the color Pumpkin Spice. It's from her fall color palette release. I'm absolutely obsessed. It looks even more amazing on screen, actually. It looks amazing in person too. I cannot get enough of this colorway. So if you want it, you can buy it on demand from her. It's not a pre-order colorway. Over on her page, it's Winnie Jo Fiber Co. Or on her Etsy store. So make sure you hit her up. And then the other project I wanted to show, I'm not gonna work on it while I talk today, but I can't get enough of it, is my first Rhinebeck cast on. So this seemingly innocent yoke, but when you flip it, it's a Fade Neve. It's a Fade Neve by Andrea Mowry. I'm gonna check in on my progress on this as we go through because I am the only one of my friends that stayed together in Rhinebeck that hasn't made this sweater yet. So I'm making this sweater. Shout out to Jess for helping me pick the colors. She's a genius. And then last but not least, before we jump into the video, I'm wearing my Rhinebeck sweater. If you saw me at Rhinebeck, you probably saw it unbuttoned. Today I have it buttoned because I'm not wearing the, the bodysuit underneath it. It was amazing for Rhinebeck and I loved it. But today we're just rocking a nice black tank under it. So I figured I'd go with this slouchy off the shoulder, feels very folklore vibes, which is appropriate because this is the folklore cardi. The pattern is free on Lion Brand and I used acrylic from Michaels. It's the Loops and Threads Impeccable yarn for it. And I actually had so many Michaels rewards points that I got the yarn for free. And then I fully spent $30 on the buttons from the Sewrella pre-order. But it was worth it. They're amazing. And I love this sweater. So today we're going to be talking about the story of Marlene Warren's death, which really turns into the story of the investigation of Marlene Warren's death. And you'll see why. But to set the stage, it was Saturday of Memorial Day weekend in West Palm Beach, Florida, where Marlene Warren and her husband Michael Warren lived. Her son, Joe Aarons, also lived with them. He was 21 at the time, and he was from a previous relationship. Her other son, John Aarons, had passed away a few years earlier in a car accident. So it was just Joe and Marlene home that morning. And around 11 a.m., Marlene opened the door because she had heard someone trying to ring the doorbell. They had never actually plugged in and set up their doorbell in the 2 years that they had lived in this home. So she heard it and she goes to answer the door. When she opens the door, there was a person dressed as a clown at the door. The clown was holding a basket of red and white carnations and 2 foil balloons, kind of like the type that you would get for somebody's birthday that stay inflated for a while. Marlene was very surprised to see this person, and they handed her the flowers and the balloons, and her son says he heard her say, "Oh, how pretty," followed by a popping sound that he thought was one of the balloons popping. It all happened so quickly. But what actually had happened was the clown pulled out a handgun and shot Marlene directly in the face. In all of the confusion and her falling and the blood and everything, the clown just turned, walked calmly away to the Chrysler LeBaron, the white Chrysler LeBaron that they had driven there, got into the car and drove away. and that was it. Marlene would die in the hospital 2 days later, but there was no other evidence, no other witnesses other than Joe and a few of his friends who had been at the house at the time. Joe and his friends would describe the clown as being a person who looked to be a male, just like male build, but their face was painted, they wore a wig, a clown costume, and a big red nose. So it was really hard to identify a witness. The bullet that the clown shot Marlene with actually went through her upper lip and lodged itself in her neck. So it was almost shot from above to have gone through like that. So at this point, you've got a 40-year-old mother in the upper middle class suburbs who's just been murdered, and it seems random. So the community was shocked. Reading through the newspaper articles in the days following the murder, a lot of folks were quoted as saying things like, "We wouldn't even open the door, wouldn't let our daughters open the door, it didn't matter who was there. The killer could strike again and we don't know what they look like or what they'll be dressed as this time," right? That's terrifying. It's, in my opinion, honestly, the most terrifying type of crime, that if it's totally random, because who's to say it couldn't happen to you? Police clearly didn't have much to go off of here. The sheriff was actually quoted by that same local paper a few days after her death, saying, "It's harder when someone wears a disguise." Really? Yes, it is harder when someone wears a disguise. But that was how lost they were at the beginning days of this investigation. So they started where investigations always start, which is, it must have been the husband. In this case, it must have been the husband or the son at first, because Marlene did have an adult son, Joe, who was at home. Both Joe and her husband, Mike, or Michael, I'll call him by either as we go through. The police kind of switch what they call him as they go through the investigation. But they both had experiences with the law and had been convicted of crimes previously. Mike had actually done 18 months probation in 1984, which was 6 years before all of this happened, after pleading guilty to tampering with the odometer on a used car. Seems weird, but if you put it into context, it makes sense. Mike had a very interesting career, but had kind of gone through a variety of different fields and ended up with, like, at the time of Marlene's death, he owned a bargain car lot. It was actually called Bargain Motors in West Palm Beach, so on the other side of town from where their home was. That was actually his alibi. For the time of Marlene's death, he was at work, and his employees can place him there. It's considered to be a very solid alibi. But that was one of their income streams, and kind of their main one was this business that they owned, and it was officially in Marlene's name. Mike and Marlene also owned a variety of small, like, low-cost rental properties around the city. Mike owned a horse racing corporation, which he had gotten into because he came up through the meatpacking industry. Had previously worked for the state, had left that job due to some questionable things about what he was doing with his time that he was on the clock for the federal government or the state government. So he had moved into used cars after that. And in his free time, he was a small plane pilot. The couple was known actually to hang out at, like, fly-in clubs, which I guess is a very rich people's version of being a car guy, is being a plane guy. I don't know, but people would describe the couple as workaholics. They did work a lot, and Marlene, especially with the rental properties and things like that, was known to be putting in a lot of time. It seems like neither of them really came from money, was my impression, after, like, reading the newspapers, reading about the family and the things that people said. So they worked very hard for where they were at, and they worked hard to stay there. Joe, Marlene's son from a previous relationship, he actually had a more violent criminal history. He and two other men were found guilty of battery after beating and stabbing a man. They were put on probation, but the victim did survive. And he also had some grand theft charges from 1989 that had been dropped about a month before Marlene's murder in 1990. So Joe's kind of, it seems like maybe he was trying to get it back together. I'm not really sure. Those are assumptions that I'm making, but That was the family's criminal history. In the early days of the investigation, the police didn't have much else to go off of other than looking into the family while they looked for the car. When they did find that getaway car, the white Chrysler LeBaron, which I am almost definitely pronouncing wrong, that it turned out to have been stolen. It was stolen on April 14th, I believe, or somewhere in that time frame, a few weeks before the murder. And it was actually kind of an odd story of how it was stolen because it was a rental car. So it was rented from another rental car company in West Palm Beach it was pretty close to Bargain Motors. So Bargain Motors, it was the used car dealership, but it was also a Bargain Motor rental, or a Bargain Auto Rentals, excuse me. It was kind of like the second piece of this, so you could rent a car from there too. What had happened with the Chrysler LeBaron was there was a couple who had rented that car from the other automotive rental company. They went to return it on a Sunday and it was closed. So they call, and somehow they ended up on the phone with a Bargain Auto Rentals, which is Mike's company. The person who answered the phone, according to the couple, gave them instructions to leave it parked outside of the gate at the place that they rented it from, with the keys on the dash. He did say, that he was from the other company, but he assured them that the two companies were actually, owned by the same group. They worked together. This was fine. Everything above board. This is what you're supposed to do. The couple, wasn't entirely comfortable with it, but this was what they were told to do. It was a young couple, so they left it there. They didn't want to pay for the extra day of the rental. And later, they called back just to confirm that they had done everything right, and the person who answered the phone denied having ever given them the instructions. At this point in the investigation, the police kind of go quiet. They're investigating in the background, of course, but they're not talking to the media every day or doing press conferences or anything like that. The next big piece of news we hear around the story was actually in October of 1990, so several months later. They actually arrested Michael Warren, but not for murder. They arrested Michael for what's called racketeering. And essentially what he was accused of was running a chop shop out of his Bargain Motors business. For anyone who's like me and doesn't know what a chop shop is, I Googled it for you, don't worry. A chop shop is essentially a garage where they take stolen cars and then take them apart and sell the parts so that they can profit off of them. Michael was accused of having that in the garage of his used car dealership. He was also accused of things like insurance fraud, among other crimes. It would eventually add up to over 60 charges for this. They had also arrested two of his employees. They were twins, both 21, Ronald and Donald Carter. Ronald and Donald Carter were arrested as well. Under the same charges, but obviously Michael was the boss, they were the employees, so they were, what the police were hoping to get was that he had directed them to do this, and they were, at this point, I don't really know where all of this came in, but it all happened at the same time. At a hearing in November, Mike actually accused the police of, quote, having a vendetta against him, and of putting more effort into going after him, harassing him, threatening to arrest him, and ruining his business, or trying to, than into actually finding his wife's murderer. If this was the case, they did a great job of it, because he was released on bail for the initial racketeering charges. In January of 1991, he was arrested again for 25 more charges that added up to that total of 66. The 25 were tampering with an odometer. Which basically makes it look like there's not as many miles on the used car as there is, or as there are, so that they can sell it for more money. And in January of 1991, he goes back to jail. Backing up, that wasn't the only thing that was happening in the case at this time. So in December of 1990, the police announced that they had actually subpoenaed two people in ties with the investigation. These are two names that you haven't heard yet, so I'm going to give a little background. The two people that were subpoenaed were Richard Keen and his mother, Florence Keen. So this happened actually not for either of the two of them, but because of Richard's wife, Sheila. Sheila had previously dated Mike Warren before he and Marlene had gotten together. Sheila, at the time of Marlene's murder, was 27, and she and Richard were married and had 2 young sons. They were ages 2 and 4 at the time of the murder. Richard and Sheila both worked for Mike at the Bargain Motors, and they did car repossessions when people didn't pay. Prior to the subpoenas, the police had been investigating Sheila. They had searched the apartment that she and Richard lived in together, and they had taken hair samples from her. This was all because Sheila matched the description of someone who purchased flowers and balloons that showed up at the crime scene, or matched the ones that showed up at the crime scene, at a Publix only, I think, 20 minutes from Marlene's home. And it happened earlier in the day before the murder. So Sheila was under investigation for that, and obviously tied to the family, the murder, etc. Claudia tied to the family and the murder because she worked for Mike and Marlene. Officially, I guess she worked for Marlene because Marlene's name was on the business. But that's not the only connection she had to the crime. There were witnesses that tied her not only to the flowers and the balloons, but also to the clown costume, the car, and there were rumors about the husband. Oh yeah. You knew it was coming. First, I want to address the car because I couldn't find anything that explicitly said how she was tied to the car. But we can kind of draw some dotted lines and make some assumptions here. But to clarify, or to be totally transparent, this is me connecting dots. This is not printed. The only thing I ever saw printed about the car was in the list of things that the Palm Beach Herald printed about ways she was potentially tied to the crime in December of 1990. But the police, when they searched her apartment, they did take a hair sample. And later they shared that there was hair found in the car, from the wig, and then also like the human's hair that was like attached to the wig kind of thing, or like the actual hair from your head. So presumably they had taken the hair sample in an attempt to rule her out, because at that point, hair samples were not necessarily you could say like, yes, that person did it because of the hair sample, but you could look at the hair and say like, oh, clearly this person did not do it. And by the fact that they kept investigating her, we can assume that the hair sample didn't rule her out. The clown costume was also possibly tied to her based on a couple of things. And it gets a little stretchy here. Oh, there's Chester and his toy. Please enjoy that. But so the clown costume, it was said 2 days before the murder, there was a clerk at a costume shop in Palm Beach that reported a woman coming to the store right as it closed, so like immediately at closing, and demanding to be let into the store, saying that she urgently needed to buy an orange wig and like the clown costume getup. The woman purchased the orange wig, the red ball nose, the clown outfit, but declined the floppy shoes, which does align with what the person at the crime scene was wearing. It is notable at this point that the police believed that the person at the crime scene was a male, based on the description given by Marlene's son and his friends who were at the house at the time of the murder. But the clerk described a woman, and this clerk actually picked Sheila out of a lineup. That's not to say that it happened before Sheila's face was circulated in the news and people were talking about her. Like, we don't know that this was a totally unbiased lineup, but it did happen. She was picked out of a lineup. It's also important to note here that we can't directly tie that clown costume to the clown costume that was worn by the murderer. The clown costume was not recovered when the car was found. It was also reported, and some people see this as a thing that ties it to her to the crime, and some people see it as a thing that would not tie her, that 2 years previously, Sheila walked into like a business and like with coworkers wearing a clown costume because she was wearing it to entertain her infant son and toddler son, who were 2 and then 0, like an infant at the time. So some people theorize, well, she already had the clown costume, but then why would she buy one? And if she was buying one, was it for the murder or was it totally unrelated for her sons? If we know that that was a thing. We don't know. It's a clown costume. And then the final piece, and maybe the juiciest piece, was the husband. There were rumors. People were talking, as they do. And when the people were talking, what they said was that Sheila and Mike, they were involved. That they hadn't necessarily stopped dating when Mike and Marlene got together. That there was a little bit of an affair going on there. Now, at this point in 1990, just rumors. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and what I'm skipping over is just a lot of back and forth on the felony charges against Mike for the used car sales. If you want to go back in and read it, like, essentially what happened was they kept delaying the trial for various reasons, and that continues. But going forward to a year after Marlene's murder, in May of 1991, the detectives speak to the media again. And in the statement they give to the media, they actually openly state that their main theory is that it was Mike and Sheila who killed Marlene. That Mike and Sheila were dating and that they wanted to be together, so they were going to kill Marlene. And that the detectives tell this to the newspaper. However, they also say we don't have enough evidence to convict them yet. And if we were to arrest them, then the clock starts on speedy trial, which is a constitutional right. So they basically said, you know, we're going to wait until we have the evidence. And the detective or the sheriff was quoted as saying to the media that, quote, they have the rest of their lives to look over their shoulders. And he was fine waiting. In his mind, he's got his guy. He's just got to wait for the evidence to fall into place so he can make that arrest. But like, Michael's trial for the car shop felonies and chop shop and all of that didn't actually start until a whole year after that, July of 1992. Now, for perspective, the twins' trials were wrapped up pretty much by the time we hit May of 1991. So there was a lot that happened. A judge and a prosecutor left. They asked for delays because of the amount of information. He wasn't going for a plea deal, and they weren't looking to give him a plea deal. Like, they wanted to put him in jail for a long time on these car shop felonies. He was convicted of 43 of the original 66 felony charges associated with the car shop. And that happened in August of 1992. So the trial was about a month long. The jury deliberated for 3 days and came back with this conviction. He was sentenced later that year. So I think it was October of 92. October, November, he was finally sentenced. And when he was sentenced, everybody went in with the expectation that this was going to be like a 30 plus years kind of deal. The prosecutor officially recommended 22 years for his crimes. But the circuit judge that was doing the sentencing actually accused the prosecutors and police of what he called selective prosecution. Selective prosecution, as the judge described, was basically, you would never have looked into this guy if his wife hadn't died or been murdered. So you're only prosecuting him because his family was the victim of a tragedy. And that to this prosecutor was unfair, or to this judge was unfair. And I mean, in some ways I agree. I can see it, right? Was he doing horrible things and did he need to be arrested? Yes, but he was a good old boy up until this point. I'm just saying. Anyway, so because of that, he was sentenced to 20 years of probation that did take into account time served, versus the 22 years in prison that was recommended by the prosecutor. Michael and his family were thrilled. The prosecution was shocked, as you might expect. Like, they're thinking, okay, this guy's our guy in this other crime. We don't have enough evidence to get him in this crime, even though he had an alibi, but they thought like he had orchestrated it, right? But so this guy's our guy. We're at least going to put him away so that he doesn't hurt anybody else. And you see this happen a lot in some of these older true crime stories. And as you look at some of these things, like, that's the way they do it. It's like, I mean, they got Al Capone on tax fraud or tax evasion, right? So that's what they're thinking they're doing here, and it doesn't work. But that was the end of it. So at that point, there was no new evidence. The case went cold. Michael doesn't show up in any other investigations for a while. I did search through several years of newspaper, and he behaved. He did what he was supposed to do, and the police had to move on to other crimes that were actively happening. And that was it. Or at least that was it until 2014. You didn't really think I was going to leave you hanging like that, did you? Come on. So in 2014, the Palm Beach Police received a federal grant to investigate this cold case and have testing done that was not possible at the time, but that would now be possible with modern technology. So they reopened the case, and they find that Mike and Sheila hadn't gone separate ways after this happened, moved on with their lives. They got married. Yeah, Mike and Sheila got married in Las Vegas in 2002. So they waited 10 years after the police kind of left him alone. 10 years out of, halfway through Mike's probation, and they got married. And they moved to Virginia, right along the Virginia and Tennessee border in a small town. And they opened a restaurant that became a popular local spot. And they had been living there for 12 years when they reopened the case. They couldn't just immediately go after them, but obviously that's sus, right? But so from 2014, when they got the grant, until 2016, the police and FBI conducted several DNA tests, as well as re-interviewing witnesses from the old files, just to confirm testimonies, see if maybe there was something someone was willing to share now that they weren't willing to share back then, especially now that Mike had left town. There was this assumption that Mike was intimidating some people into not talking. And it seems like it was true, because they did get a lot more detail into things that were going on back then, when they reopened in 2014 than they had originally gotten. Again, all the detail is circumstantial, but when you tie it to everything else, it helps paint the picture. In 2017, they had completed all of this. They went to a grand jury, and Sheila Keen Warren, was indicted for the murder of Marlene Warren. So they basically said, we think she murdered the first wife so she could become the second wife. According to the prosecution, it was the DNA that made the difference. They had a lot of circumstantial evidence before the DNA, but when you tie that DNA with a lot of circumstantial evidence, and there was a DNA match to hairs that were found in the car from hairs that Sheila had given them for testing back in 1990. But when you put that together, that's a very solid case. Mike, as you might expect, had a lot to say. He's quoted in the media as recently as 2018, 2019 saying, the police still have a vendetta against us and they don't have any new evidence, so I don't know what's going on, kind of things. And a lot of that, I think, is just what you would expect at this point. But there's this little part of me that's what if he had no idea? What if this guy is really just it's been 27 years and the police are coming for my family again? I don't know. Before I go on to the next part, I just want to level set real quick so that I don't get sued. Sheila's been charged with Marlene's murder. Sheila is in jail awaiting trial. She's been there since 2017 when she was arrested. Because of COVID, the trial has been postponed a few times. It is currently scheduled for spring of 2022. So we're still several months away from it at this point. At the time that I'm recording this video, Sheila has not been convicted of Marlene's murder. So I'm going to share a timeline and some evidence that the prosecution laid out. I just want to be really clear. This is evidence that the prosecution has laid out. This has not been, she hasn't been tried and convicted. So just allegedly, this is what happened. And this timeline came from the assistant state attorney on November 6th, 2020. I believe that was the first time there was a trial postponed. So I'm actually going to read this off from my notes for you. So he alleges that on that day, on May 26th, 1990, Keen knocked on the door of the Warren home at 10:45 a.m., quote, dressed as a clown and holding a handgun. After the shooting, the clown, presumably Keen, or allegedly Keen, drove away in the LeBaron, and the victim died 2 days later from a bullet to the head. We talked about that. Witnesses inside the home at the time described the clown as having, quote, man-like features, but Scott pointed out, Scott being the assistant state attorney that filed this, that at the time, Sheila was taller. She was also thin, white female with long brown hair, and was sometimes described to have like masculine features. I don't know what that means. But like basically what he's saying here is they could have made the mistake that it was her, and I think really it was because she's tall. The next point he made is that Michael Warren's associates then told the detectives that he was having an affair with Sheila. And that the couple had been seen in, quote, romantic embraces. Other sources have said they were seen, you know, doing the thing, the dirty, around the office, kissing, etc. When questioned after the shooting, Sheila denied ever having fooled around with her boss or having a relationship with her boss. One of Mike's employees told investigators that 45 days before the murder, he drove Warren and Keen to pick up a stolen white LeBaron and was told to never tell anybody about it. Sheila told the detectives that she had, quote, never been in a Chrysler LeBaron. That 45 days lines up pretty well with when it went missing, or when it was stolen, which would have been in April 14th. So April 14th to May 26th. It's about right. Two Publix clerks said that they recalled a woman buying, quote, the exact flower and balloon ensemble found at the scene. These employees also said that their female customer had male mannerisms. I don't know what I read into that, but okay. I don't know that I would describe a person as that, but maybe they did. That's okay. And the Publix was about a mile from Keen's apartment. She denied shopping at the store, which, okay, girl, grocery store about a mile away, like, guess where we're getting groceries? But she denied it in the interview with the police. It's also, like, notable at this time that, like, when she was being interviewed by detectives, she very quickly went to, like, would not speak to them without an attorney present. And it was noted a couple times in my research that she wasn't cooperating. I don't know if I hold that against her, because in that situation and, like, looking at it, if it was me and I was in that situation and I knew I was innocent and I knew the police were, like, trying to get me or get him on something, like, yeah, I'd lawyer up too. I don't know if that screams that she's guilty. A lot of people like to say, especially in that time, like, if you're innocent, why wouldn't you do everything you can to help the police? But we see cases where the police want to solve it, not want to get the right person, and so maybe that was the fear. Getting back to the statement. Detectives learned that a tall, thin, white woman with long brown hair had purchased a clown costume without the shoes from Spotlight Costume in West Palm Beach 2 days before the murder. They bought a wig identical to the one that the woman paid for, and that one matched the one that was in the car, or like what the hairs that were in the car. The employees identified Sheila. So witnesses to the shooting said that the clown was wearing black lace-up shoes or boots, not clown shoes, which we'd established like a couple times here that the shoes didn't get purchased or didn't get bought from the costume store. But it was black lace-up shoes. In a search of Sheila's home, they found 2 pairs of black lace-up shoes. Crime scene technicians recovered orange yellow, it's described as orange yellow, acrylic hair fibers, and burgundy hair fibers from the bottom of the shoes. Investigators also found the white LeBaron abandoned in a Winn-Dixie parking lot 4 days after the shooting. They confirmed it was the same car that the employee had seen Warren and Keen driving. They also collected hair fibers from the car's carpet. They specifically collected orange-yellow acrylic hair fibers, as well as what appeared to be human hairs. A microscopic analysis was conducted of those orange hairs found in the LeBaron, and the ones on the shoes in Keen's home, and the balloon ribbon that was at the crime scene. Also on the wig bought by the detectives from the costume store. So this is like 4 different sources of orange hair fibers. All of them were identical. So it all matches up. Like, they can prove this is all from the same thing. An analysis of the burgundy hairs recovered from the shoes and the car concluded that they were, quote, identical in comparison. Further, a sample of Sheila's hair was identical to the human hair located in the LeBaron, or in the car. A modern day DNA analysis of the hair from the getaway car is actually what made the arrest possible, according to this report. The examination determined that Sheila could not be excluded as the source of the hair. Moreover, a DNA analysis of the skin portion of the hair at the root, so like that part, concluded that it is hair from her head, which is why they made the arrest. And that's all the evidence. When the judge heard it, they said that they had more than enough evidence to indict her, to go through with the trial, all of this. We will see what unfolds in that trial in spring of 2022. And there's 2 little details that they really hit it home for me. The first is that Mike had said, or was reported as having said to his employees on several occasions, that he would never divorce Marlene because then he'd have to give her half of everything. They didn't have a prenup. So if they were to not be married anymore, like, Marlene would have to be dead. And then the second one is right before Sheila's arrest in 2017, they sold their restaurant business. Like, they knew. I don't know. Obviously, we have to wait for the trial, right? But what do you think? Let me know in the comments. And hey, if you made it this far and you liked this story and you liked this video and you want to see more, make sure you're subscribed to my channel and that you hit that like button so that I know that you like what I'm doing. Okay, episode 1, check. We got 9 more to go. I hope you're as excited as I am, and maybe I'll finish this. Actually, I have to finish this by the time we're done because the testnet is due before the end of the year. But get excited. I'll talk to y'all soon. Bye, makers.